complex. And this is going to be a combination of a tip pool and a tip share. And this is a very common scenario we see with many of our customers in the real world. So in this restaurant, we have 4 servers that are working. We have 2 bartenders that are working, and we have a support staff of a host and a busser. And now in this rule, what we're going to be seeing is that 3 rules exist, or 3 pieces of tip logic are overlaid on this restaurant and the service staff within it. Servers and bartenders are sharing 5% of their tips with the support staff. These are the individuals who are delighting the guests, seating them, getting those tables cleaned, making sure that everything is going smoothly so that your servers and bartenders can focus strictly on that guest satisfaction. Also, we have servers sharing 5% of their tips with the bartender. Same philosophy here is that these bartenders are spending time that they could be serving their own guests to pour beers or pour wine or make nice cocktails for the guests that the servers are serving and will ultimately be tipped by, right? So something should be received back to the bartenders for the work they're doing to ensure that their fellow employees are generating the highest amount of tips they can have and your guests are as satisfied as possible. And lastly, bartenders are pooling tips amongst themselves. In this scenario with 2 bartenders, we will also often see, one bartender is going to be serving all the guests seated at the bar, and one bartender may be working the well, getting those drinks out to the floor. We don't want them to worry about who is working which. We want them to know that both of them are critical to the entire restaurant operating as a team and all guests having a great experience. So we're actually just going to have those bartenders pool tips amongst themselves. Now, if we were to apply all of that logic and we overlaid it with some math here, and I'll show you what we're looking at here on the left, is how much did people bring in before tip distribution logic was applied? And on your right, you're going to start to see that after tip distribution logic applied, what occurred? When we look at those rules, and I'll slide back here so we can review those one more time. When we look at all 3 of these rules that are existing, what is going to actually happen in a real world scenario? So first that I want to draw close attention to is the bottom of that screen, total tips 400 on both sides. It is unbelievably important that we always remember the total amount of tips that are brought in must also be paid out to that staff. The managers can never keep any tips. Not once under federal law are managers allowed to take tips out of this. The house themselves, the restaurant, can never have tips. So we always want to make sure that every single penny that is brought in from service staff is accounted for getting paid out to service and supporting staff that are making this happen. Now, in that rules that we saw earlier, again, bartender A is the individual serving the guest at the bar. And so they're actually getting direct tips. They're dropping checks. They're making sure they get signed receipts back. Whereas bartender B, the individual working the well, making sure that everything's getting out to these guests at the tables, they have $0 in tips. So these 2 are going to end up being pooling tips. And as you see over here, they should be equal in the end. But a couple things have to happen before then. So our servers, we have 4 of them working. 2 of them brought in $50 in tips each. 2 brought in $100 each. And then finally, we have our host and our busser, critical members of the entire restaurant, but not directly receiving tips. So when we start to look at this, we have bartenders and servers who should both be giving up tips to the host and busser. And we see here, of course they are. There's going to be 5% getting kicked over from both sides, and they're going to now walk away with $10 in tips each. Whereas the bartenders are going to be pooling tips and receiving part of this tip out from the servers. So when we look at this and we see that 10% of tips should have been total given up from all servers, where we started with $50 over here, we are now down to $45, so that is working correctly. And similarly, where we started with $100 over here, we are now working with 90 on server C and D, and that is also working correctly. So we're looking good on that front. And if we run the math through all of this, we are now left with $400 in tips total, or the exact outcome that we were hoping to expect, right? The same amount of tips have come in, have gone out, and what we're doing is redistributing these tips to the individuals that are most delighting our guests, that are making sure they have a great experience, and that are making sure your restaurant runs smoothly, right? These tables get turned over. These tables are clean. The guests have been greeted the moment they walked in the door, informed their table is ready, taken to it, told about the specials, whatever it may be that your staff is looking for. We always want to make sure that we have tip logic in place that applies accordingly.